You thought you were being mature with your girlfriend. You thought you were handling things like an adult with your boyfriend. You thought staying calm was strength. It wasn't. It was fear. Fear of losing the relationship. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of making things worse. So you softened your voice when something bothered you. You held back reactions you used to express freely. You chose silence instead of tension. When your partner pulled away, you didn't confront it. You understood it. You told yourself they were stressed, busy, going through something. You adjusted your expectations. You lowered your standards quietly. You became patient in places you were once clear. You called this emotional intelligence. You called this growth. You called this being secure. But security doesn't change behavior to avoid loss. Fear does. Every time you swallowed a reaction to keep peace, you weren't being mature. You were managing risk. Every time you explained instead of standing, you weren't communicating. You were stabilizing something that was already shifting. Your partner didn't hear wisdom in your calm. They felt hesitation. They felt someone stepping back from their own position. You didn't lose attraction because you were honest. You didn't lose it because you cared. You lost it because your maturity was built on fear of disruption. You weren't grounded. You were careful. And attraction does not respond to careful behavior. It responds to discipline.
Staying calm felt like control. You told yourself that reacting emotionally would only make things worse, that strong reactions were immature, that composed people don't create friction. So you learned to regulate. You paused before responding. You chose neutral words. You removed edge from your tone. On the surface, this looked like growth, but underneath, something else was happening. You weren't calming yourself because you were grounded. You were calming yourself because you were monitoring outcome. You weren't asking, what do I actually think? You were asking, what won't push them away? That question changes everything. The moment your behavior is filtered through preservation, it stops being self-directed. It becomes defensive. Your partner didn't experience your calm as confidence. They experienced it as containment, not strength, control. And controlled behavior doesn't feel solid, it feels restrained. Before, your reactions had texture, they had timing, they had unpredictability. That unpredictability created tension. Tension created attraction. When you removed it to stay mature, you removed the pressure that kept attraction awake. You didn't become easier to be with, you became easier to manage. Your partner didn't think they're emotionally evolved. They felt something quieter. This no longer moves me. Because attraction doesn't respond to calmness itself. It responds to calmness that comes from certainty. And certainty doesn't hesitate. It doesn't soften to maintain balance. It doesn't negotiate its own position. When calmness is built on fear of loss, it reads as withdrawal, not distance. Withdrawal from your own stance. And once attraction senses that withdrawal, it begins doing what it always does. It adjusts, downward, quietly, without a reason. Understanding felt like the safest move. When something felt off, you didn't challenge it. You explained it away. You told yourself your partner didn't mean it, that they were tired, distracted, under pressure. So instead of holding your position, you interpreted theirs. You didn't ask for clarity, you offered excuses. That felt generous. It felt emotionally mature. It felt like choosing connection over conflict. But understanding, when it replaces position, does something subtle. It shifts responsibility away from the dynamic and onto you. You become the one translating, the one accommodating, the one smoothing meaning. And the more you understand, the less you are felt. Because attraction doesn't respond to explanation, it responds to presence. Presence isn't loud, it isn't aggressive, it's firm. Before, when something didn't sit right, your reaction created shape in the relationship. It signaled where you stood without you needing to justify it. Once you started understanding instead of standing, that shape dissolved. Your partner didn't feel challenged. They didn't feel confronted. They felt unopposed. Unopposed dynamics don't create polarity. They create comfort. Comfort feels safe. It feels kind. It feels smooth. And it slowly removes orientation. Your partner no longer had to respond to where you were. They only had to continue where they already were. This is why being understanding often coincides with attraction slipping. Not because understanding is wrong, but because it quietly replaces the pressure that attraction needs to stay engaged. You didn't lose attraction when you stopped arguing. You lost it when you stopped holding a clear position and started translating theirs instead. That's when the dynamic flattened, and once it flattens, attraction doesn't protest, it adapts. This is where most people confuse two different things. They confuse maturity with stability. Maturity is emotional awareness. Stability is behavioral consistency under pressure. They are not the same. You believed that controlling your emotions meant you were stable. You believed that staying calm meant you were grounded. But grounding doesn't come from suppression. It comes from alignment. Before things shifted, your behavior didn't need to be managed. You reacted naturally. You expressed without calculation. You moved without asking whether it was safe. That wasn't immaturity. That was internal stability. Once fear entered, your behavior started requiring supervision. You monitored your words. You edited your reactions. You delayed responses to appear composed. That isn't stability. That's control under threat. And attraction reads the difference immediately. Because stability feels effortless. Control feels contained. Effortless behavior has weight. Contained behavior has tension, but the wrong kind. Not polarity, pressure. Your partner didn't feel reassured by your maturity. They felt that something was being held back. That holding back removed definition, and definition is what attraction orients to. Attraction doesn't attach to how calm you appear. It attaches to how unchanging your position is when the dynamic shifts. When your calmness depends on the situation going well, it is not calmness. It is risk management. Your partner doesn't think this consciously. They sense it. They sense when your behavior is anchored and when it is conditional. Conditional behavior doesn't feel unreliable. It feels negotiable. And negotiable dynamics don't generate pull. This is why trying to be mature often accelerates attraction loss, not because maturity is unattractive, but because fear-based maturity erodes the internal structure attraction depends on. You weren't becoming wiser, you were becoming careful, and careful behavior tells attraction that something is at stake. When something is at stake, behavior changes. When behavior changes to protect outcome, attraction no longer has a stable position to attach to, so it lets go. Not abruptly, but decisively, quietly, downward.
Fear is quiet when it's intelligent. It doesn't panic. It doesn't explode. It doesn't beg. It reframes. It convinces you that you're being evolved, that you're rising above instinct, that you're choosing reason over emotion. So when something feels wrong, fear doesn't tell you to react. It tells you to reinterpret. Don't take it personally. Be understanding.
Give it time, stay grounded, and each of those sounds wise. But emotional intelligence isn't the ability to tolerate misalignment. It's the ability to remain aligned without needing reassurance. Fear-based intelligence does the opposite. It teaches you to override your signals in order to keep things intact. You stop trusting your internal responses. You start doubting your own reactions. You treat discomfort as immaturity, and slowly you disconnect from the position you used to hold naturally. Your partner doesn't experience this as growth. They experience it as absence of edge. Edge isn't aggression, it's clarity. Clarity creates polarity. Polarity keeps attraction awake. When fear reframes itself as maturity, clarity disappears. You become adaptable, flexible, easy to be with, and easy dynamics don't require attraction to stay active. This is why people who pride themselves on emotional intelligence often lose attraction without understanding why. They did everything right. They stayed calm. They didn't overreact. They handled things like an adult. But adults who manage fear instead of standing in alignment don't feel solid. They feel cautious. And attraction does not orient around caution. It orients around certainty. Not loud certainty, not dominant certainty, internal certainty, the kind that doesn't need to reinterpret itself to stay connected. Once fear takes the place of that certainty, attraction doesn't argue, it adjusts, quietly, lower. After fear replaces alignment, the relationship doesn't feel unstable, it feels managed. Your partner still stays, they still talk, they still include you, but they no longer orient around you. You are present, but you're no longer felt the same way. Affection becomes polite. Intimacy becomes cooperative. Desire becomes optional. Nothing is missing on the surface. Underneath, something crucial has shifted. You are no longer experienced as a position. You're experienced as an adjustment layer. Someone who adapts, someone who absorbs, someone who smooths. That feels safe, and safety is not the same as attraction. Attraction doesn't disappear in this phase, it steps aside because the relationship no longer requires it to function. Communication works, conflict is minimal, everything is fine, but fine is flat. Your partner doesn't feel resistance when they pull away. They don't feel tension when they change pace. They don't feel polarity when they shift energy, because you've already adjusted for them. The dynamic becomes efficient. Efficient dynamics don't pull, they maintain. This is why people stay in relationships like this for a long time. There's nothing wrong enough to leave, but there's nothing strong enough to deepen. Attraction has been reassigned from driver to background support. And once attraction moves into the background, it rarely returns to the front without a structural change. Not a conversation, not reassurance, not more maturity. Structure. By the time most people realize this, they've already been mature for too long.
You didn't lose attraction because you lacked maturity. You lost it because fear replaced alignment. Maturity is not the ability to stay calm at any cost. It is the ability to remain self-aligned when calmness is no longer rewarded. Fear teaches you to smooth, to reinterpret, to manage yourself so nothing breaks. Alignment teaches you to stand without escalating and without retreating. Attraction does not respond to how reasonable you sound. It responds to whether your behavior still comes from a stable internal position. The moment your calmness exists to prevent loss, it stops being calmness. It becomes caution. Caution removes edges. Edges create polarity. Polarity keeps attraction alive. This is why people mistake fear for growth. Fear looks responsible. It sounds intelligent. It behaves politely. But attraction doesn't orient around politeness. It orients around certainty. Not loud certainty, not controlling certainty, internal certainty that doesn't need to reinterpret itself to stay connected. You thought you were being mature. You weren't. You were protecting the relationship from disruption by disrupting your own position. And attraction responds to that disruption the same way it always does. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It adjusts. Downward.